Hello, everyone, and welcome to Creativity Worth Expressing. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and today I have special guest, author H L Burke. Welcome to Creativity Worth Expressing. How are you doing today?
Really good. Thank you for having me.
Well, for this interview, I wanted to dive into your story, how you got in love with creativity, with writing, and to discover a bit more about your books. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right.
Get
So,
going.
so first, I would like to ask you, when was it that you fell in love with books? And is there a specific book from your childhood that got you captivated with reading?
So I don't even know the author of it, but it was probably a picture book called Only or Many Moons. It's about a princess who wants the moon for Christmas and or for her birthday and won't be happy until she gets it. So the jester makes her a little silver moon and then goes through this whole story about how there are so many moons and it comes back and regrows every time. And it's just a cute little fable about, seeing the world in a different way, I think is what it's about. Because to an extent he's kind of lying to the little kid, but he's lying to her in a way that just tells a story and helps her conceptualize the world about why the moon always comes back. And I don't know, for me that's what stories have always been. It's about telling the world through a different way of looking at it. So I think that would be the one that really got me. Most of my early writing was not actually trying to be a writer. It was trying to come up with collaborative storytelling with me and my friends, because we would play imaginative games. We'd go out in the forest and pretend we were orphans running away, like, the Boxcar Children or something. And then I'd want to write those stories down and send them back to them. And I would do that. I would write stories and send them to my friends. At first, I would just pass it back and forth for notebook paper, but after a while, it became email based. And so I'd be emailing me for my friends files of stories I wrote about stuff. And it just became my way of, like, I'm a little bit of a class clown slash entertainer type personality. And it was kind of my way of keeping people entertained. So for me, writing's always been very much about the audience. It's about interacting with somebody. And in some ways, I like a little, I'm very kind of a little bit selfish about my creative process. Like I could never co-write with anyone. I think that I would just need to be able to be the one in charge too much. But I like to have other types of like subtler feedback. So as long as I'm the leader, I'm okay to let people help. So.
So you got into your writing journey for fun, it sounds, and entertainment. But when was it? Is there a moment where you decided, you know what? I don't want it. I don't want this only to stay in the emails. I want people outside to be reading my stories. When was that moment?
Well, I think when I found out that you could do writing for a living, I was like, oh, okay, well, I want to do that. But then life got in the way. I was 18 or so, and I started sending out books to publishers because, well, that's what you do. That's how you reach an audience. If you're a writer, you write, you publish. It was 2003, 2004. So indie stuff didn't have as big a hold on the audience and stuff. So I was very much being told, well, if you want to be a writer, this is how you do it. And I was trying to do that. Um, I know now that the manuscripts I was sending out then weren't anywhere near publication worthy. Um, that said, even if they had been, what happened was I started working, I got married, I had kids, I moved to Japan, I moved to Florida, and it was like life got in the way, and I just stopped writing almost altogether until I was 29. And then I had a manuscript I'd written when I was 21 that I was, I'm like, well, if we're going to get a publishing contract, I don't really have the energy to try for a publishing contract. I'm just going to put it up on my blog because I had a mommy blog that I was doing. And I put up my blog, and one of my friends, another mother, found it's like, well, why haven't you published this? And I'm like, well, publishing takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. So I don't think it does anymore. So Googling self-publishing, I'm like, she's right. It's changed a lot in the last 10 years. So I was like, oh, if I can do it, well, why not? And so I just did it.
And being an indie author, what challenges would you say have been very difficult, but that you've navigated through in this journey?
So the one I haven't navigated through completely is marketing. That's the one that's the most difficult, but I am not by any means an expert on that. I would say the hardest part and the part that God wasn't ready to being ready is learning how to find good critique partners to give you actual feedback. Um, because that is the only way I think that most writers can level up. You can't really get your own writing to publication level on your own. And for some people, that's critique partners. For some people, that's a professional editor. For me, it's always been critique partners. Like I like to hear a bunch of voices and then decide which one I agree with, rather than relying on one person. So um, at the time, I was on a critique swapping website called scribblefile.com, and I was there for quite a while, just exchanging stories back and forth. I was one of the most prolific critiquers too. Like I would critique so many stories. So learning how to get that input and to filter it through what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and learning how to find your own voice, how to take feedback while still being confident, and when you know what's right for your story as opposed to some random person. That I think was the biggest formative part of learning how to become an indie, so that I could kind of take control of my own stories and put them out there while still being confident in them.
And what was the first book that you published?
So technically I did just throw up that one that was on my blog onto Amazon at one point, and so that is technically the first one, but I did take it down like 9 months later after I started getting more. So the first one that is still up is Dragon's Curse, which is a very tropey fantasy romance, but actually that's one of my best sellers because people love tropes, about a scholar who goes to help a king who's been injured in a fight with dragons, and this dragon comes and starts causing chaos, and she goes to talk to him because the knight says, well, I will kill the dragon if I get to marry her. And she's like, no, 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 I'm not doing that. I'm going to go make a deal with the dragon. And so she does, and then the story unfolds from there. And that's my first. I published that in 2014, so 10 years ago as of last January. And yeah, and that became a 4 book series. And then I just took off from there and just haven't stopped.
How many books have you published? Let me do that again. How many books in total have you published?
So my answer to this is I've written more books than I can count, because I've written a lot of books, not because I count very high, because it's 40 something. I keep forgetting, and then I have to sit down and like do a tally mark thing. Well, there's this series, and I know it's 40 something, but I couldn't tell you if it's 42 or 45.
Now, now,
So
I found something very interesting about your website is that there's a variety of genres that you write. It's not just one down the line. There's romance, there's the young adult, there's steampunk, there's superheroes. Can you kind of elaborate on how do you choose a genre for a specific book and how the writing process goes?
so for me, I usually have an idea in my head and it starts cooking and mixing up. And I usually get the characters first and their main relationship slash dilemma. And then I just start pulling things together around them. And sometimes it's really obvious what genre is going to be in, because I've been writing superhero for the last 4 years now, I think. And with superhero, I started intentionally wanting to write a superhero book because I love them so very, very much, or I love the superhero genre. There's actually not a lot of superhero books out there. There's comic books and there's movies and there's TV shows, but there are relatively few superhero books. Um, so those ones, it's kind of obvious what genre it's going to be in. And I just have been picking characters and writing spin-offs for them, and that's just how that works. But for let's start. I think my first one, with my fantasy romance, I just knew it was going to be a fantasy romance with dragons because that's what I wanted to like to read at the time, and I wanted to write that. And then we have my next book series, the first one I decided to go steampunk on, and I wasn't even that familiar with steampunk. Like I read Jules Verne as a kid, but steampunk as an idea was it's still a little bit of a niche genre. But I had this idea for writing a character that was based on like one of those point and click adventure games that I used to play all the time, like Myst and oh gosh, there's so many of them. But the idea is a character who's dropped into an environment and has to solve puzzles and find clues to find their way out of it. And I was like, well, what would be a good setup for that? And I'm like, well, what if it's a haunted mansion? And what if it's this one? And that one just came out of what kind of puzzles do I want? And I'm like, what if they have gears and goggles? Okay, it's steampunk. So And that was what I did for that. I also think that that one was very highly inspired by the fact that I played Myst so much as a kid, and that does have that kind of like old looking technology with high level fantasy tech involved, and I really love that setup. Myst is one of the formulative things of my creative process. I love that series of games so much.
So do you think
So
that
yeah,
any of your books can be converted into a storyline for a video game?
several can. Nissa Glass obviously was kind of set up with that intent. I have been trying to write a tabletop RPG set in my superhero world for a little bit, but it's very complicated because I decided I needed to reinvent the world and make my own gaming system. I do some TTRPG stuff on the side. I'm a casual game master slash TTRPG writer. Um, and Spellsmith and Carver also has like this fun magic system that's based on symbols, which I actually think would make a really cool card game. I'm always kind of thinking like that.
Well, so my next question is, you have a variety of genres. When you get in the mindset of writing your next book, do you have any rituals when it comes to preparing and doing the work? And if you have rituals, do those rituals also change depending on the genre that you're writing?
So I am a creature of chaos. I
All
don't really
right.
do things. Yeah, I my learning style has always been jump in and push buttons. So if I get an idea, what I do is I kind of sit on it and I think about it, and then I have this Discord server with my utmost top fans in it. I'll go in there and I'll talk a little bit about them, like, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And then they'll like throw, oh, that's exciting, or well, what if this? And I'll talk with it back and forth for them for a while. But then usually, once I'm right, when I feel like I've got a high enough grasp on the story to know what it is, I'll pull up a Google Doc and I'll just start writing a paragraph, a, a summary of the story. Each major plot point is a paragraph, and I'll just paragraph. Usually, it's about a 2 page document. And when that's done, I'm like, okay, this is good. I can write this, and then I just start writing. And I've done that across most of my genres for a little while now. I think the first book I did that with was Cora and the Nurse Dragon. I used to be a little more chaotic with Dragon's Curse. I had what I would call a to-do list for my book. It was like go to the kingdom, meet the king, meet the knight, dragon comes, meet the dragon. It was like, just the list of things that need to happen for the plot to happen, and I would just go through and click them off. But it was actually a National Novel Writing Month is a thing, and I've been doing it for I haven't done it for a few years, but back when I used to do it, I knew it was coming up, and I hadn't planned to write a book for it that year because I just finished one. I think I just finished, oh gosh, maybe Beggar Magic, one of those. And so I feel like I hadn't wanted to start another book just for National Novel Writing Month. But then I got this idea for Cora and the Nurse Dragon just out of nowhere. And I was like, well, I can't start now because NaNoWriMo is next month. If I start now, I'll be cheating because I'm starting early. And so I was like, because I couldn't start it, I said, well, I've got to get it out of my head somewhere. So I started writing that summary. And that was the fastest I'd ever written a book. Like, just because I had that summary out in front of me, that was just like every time I sat down the computer, I knew exactly what I was going to write for the day. I'm like, well, the next paragraph in my summary is this. And that made me able to write so quickly that I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that every time from now on. And I have. And sometimes I will stop partway through, reassess, and toss out or change elements of that paragraph. But it's just such a good way to start having that roadmap that I'm always going to do it. I don't think it's a traditional plotting method because I've seen people with plots and they have things like inciting events, you know, twist and stuff like that, and all these like technical terms. I don't think about stories that way. I just think about stories as kind of like unfolding, and one thing leads to another. And I do have a lot of plot structure ingrained in my brain just because I watch so much procedural television. I tell people if you really want to understand plot points, you don't need to study the greats. The greats break the rules. If you just want to understand framework, just go out and watch 10 episodes of NCIS. It's always exactly the same. It's beat for beat. They follow the exact same plot line every time. And you can get to the point where you're like, okay, well, this is when this is going to happen. This is when this is going to happen because it's the same time. And just understanding that is really a great way to get your head around plot structure.
So you've broken the code when it comes to NCIS.
NCIS, CSI, Psych is my favorite television show, and I think that's way much better than the other ones. I will fight anyone who doesn't say Psych is a great show. That's my favorite. But yeah, I've watched a lot of um when I was a stay-at-home mom and my girls were very little, that sometimes there was like nothing else to do because you sitting there nursing or folding laundry, and I would have something like that going on in the background pretty much constantly. So
So we've already spoken a bit about the process. We've spoken about how you fell in love with books from the very beginning. Now I wanted to ask, well, you have so many books out, so there must be a bunch of characters. Can you choose from all the books that you've written, maybe one to three protagonists and antagonists, and can you share a bit about them?
so I think my absolute favorite character I've written, just because I've written him for more length of his story, is Jake. I'm going to call him Jake Lucas for to avoid spoilers because he does get a name change at some point during the series. But Jake, in my superhero series, it's supervillain rehabilitation, which means that it starts out with supervillains who are brought onto superhero teams to try to teach them how to be heroes instead. And I have a young adult spinoff where the mentors from my first series decided that, well, it's great to reform supervillains, but what if we could catch them before they, reach that point? So they start a camp for at-risk superpowered teens. And Jake is this angry young man whose whole family is supervillains. He's been raised by his uncle who runs a supervillain gang and has had him pulling high since he was 12, and he's 16 now. And he gets nabbed by DOSA, the Department of Super Able, the superhero group, and they're like, oh wait, well, this is a kid. We just caught a kid. So they send him to the camp along with a couple other kids who are there for other reasons, and he's all he can think about is I got to get back to my gang. I need to be loyal to my gang. But when he's there and people start treating him like a kid for the first time, and he's got friends and he's got a cup of like the married couple that runs the camp are actually looking out for him and caring for him, and it just starts breaking him down. And eventually he has to choose what side he's on. Is he going to go back to his villain ways, or is he going to stay with his new life? And I started writing that, and I wrote 4 books of him growing up. So they go from when he's 16 to 18. And then I have also written stories where he is in his early 20s, and it shows him being the woman he falls in love with and gets married to. And then I skip forward and I've written another story that takes place when he's 29 and he's a father of 3 kids, and he's now he's mentoring teens the way his adopted parents mentor him. And it's just seeing a character through that level of growth is not something I get to do all the time, because most stories are fairly contained. You start and they end, and maybe you're with the character for a couple months or a couple years. But going through from 16 to 29 with a character who had that much growth, I think that's probably the most attachment I've ever gotten to a character, just because of how much time I put into him and how much change he went through. Um, if we're just gonna, you said a couple, so let me see. I'm thinking about if I have any good antagonists, because I'm not a huge villain writer. My villains often are more to serve the plot, and they're not that interesting to me. Bad guys are usually not that interesting to me. There are some exceptions. Some are just like more jokester types, but a lot of times they're just people you want to toss off a cliff. uh, let's see, dragon, magic. Um, yeah, I can't really think of any great villains I've written who are not just a little bit evil, so or just boring to me because they're just too evil. Um, I will say that uh, I think that the best antagonists I've ever written aren't actually the supervillains; it's everybody's awful families. So like a lot of times I'll have a literal supervillain, and then the character also has he's like in Second Chance Superhero, Braden he's a superhero, and he's back to his small town after going he left at 18 when his girlfriend broke up with him, and joined the Marines to get away from it all, and then volunteered for a program that let him develop superpowers. And now he's back in town because his mother, who he's kind of estranged from, has gotten in a car accident, and he comes back to take care of her. But that woman, she is the most bitter, life didn't work out for me and it's everybody else's fault one. And there's a point where she makes a snide comment that she never should have kept the baby right in front of him, and you could just like every reader I had after that was like they didn't care about the supervillains. They wanted the mom to get punished because I think it's that personal like petty hits you on an emotional level type uh, evil. The way that you're someone who's willing to casually hurt someone who is basically just looking to them for support is way harder to taste than the supervillain who has a plot to blow up the city if you don't send him $2 billion. I mean, it's like one of them it hits harder. Like, okay, yeah, he's a supervillain, he's kind of cool. The other one is like, oh, that woman, she hurt him so much. So yeah, I think the petty villains are the ones that I really get some juice out of writing is because they just have that emotional gut punch that the characters have to deal with. If I were going to pick one other character, I'm gonna say, see, do I want to do? I've talked about my superhero, so I'm going to say that the sarcastic computer in Nissa Glass. It seems like a funny pick, but if you read the book, it in the end will make sense. But there is a computer. It's his name's Hart, which is HART. It's like an acronym for something, and he is the house computer uh, of the mansion that Nissa breaks into to try to find the secret papers to prove herself innocent of murder. And the security system is there the whole time, and it decides it wants to help her because it's got gaps in its memory and it can't figure out what's going on. It needs her to help solve the puzzle too. And it is always telling puns and just like being sarcastic and like, so just writing a computer, because when I was writing that book, my first thought was, wait, well, she's just going to be going through this empty house alone. She's not going to have anyone to talk to. This is going to be really boring. So I'm like, well, what if she turns on the security system and the security system has a personality? And so that was a lot of fun because on one hand, he is a disembodied voice talking through speakers to help her through stuff, which is kind of a video game trope. But on the other, he's got a lot of personality, and they come to like care about each other by the end of the thing, and it's kind of sweet. And then there's a twist, but I won't tell you that.
Okay. Well, in the beginning, we were talking about how writing was a form of entertainment, and you were also saying that you were sharing it with your friends. But in your writing process and in your writing journey to where you are now, would you say that your writing is mostly for entertainment, or is there like a theme or a moral to the story that you wish that the readers can get out of them?
It's almost impossible to write a story that doesn't have some sort of message in it. And even like the most basic My Little Pony type stuff has the message that friendship and loyalty and being good are important, because you say something whenever you tell a story by your choices, no matter what you do. I'm mostly just an entertainment writer. Everything I joke that I'm not actually a very deep thinker or a deep person. I'm very good with words and I'm very quick and glib, but um, to me, it's very intuitive, and I don't really think in deep layers of what I'm doing. I just like what it happens, but what happens happens. But when you are telling a story, the things that come across as important over and over again for me, they're things like family and forgiveness, second chances, but also that second chances need to come with real change. I think that's one of the things about the Supervillain Rehabilitation Project that I really like. It is about giving people who've done bad things a second chance, but it's also about them proving that they have actually learned and changed, as opposed to just giving them a get out of jail free card because they're a sexy villain, which is a theme with some things. Um, so yeah, it's there is that underlying message or theme, and because I think if you don't give characters something deeper to overcome on a personal level, as opposed to just, well, go here, fight the bad guy, it loses the drive to continue. You need to know why it matters to them, and in knowing what it matters to them, you need to know what's their wound, or what do they care about, and what are they willing to risk everything to protect or to change, or and that gets into the heart of who they are. And I do tend to write people or characters who are flawed, but they're also fundamentally decent people. They're not really terrible people. So generally their choices do come back to making good decisions, especially in the end when they're forced to it and they realize that um, there's usually something that they care about more than themselves. I think that's even one thing that I say in Reform. There's uh, Aiden, who is the brother of the main character Prism, and they're Fade is the former villain, right? So he's on their team. Prism's convinced she can turn him to the hero side. Aiden isn't convinced that he can. He tells Fade, "You're never going to be a hero until you find something you care about more about than yourself." And through the story, Fade does find out what he cares about more than himself. But that is part of his journey. It's like learning what are you going to put before yourself, and that's kind of the message of a lot of my books.
Okay, thank you. Now for this part of the interview, I'm going to ask questions about you. You ready? Okay, so
Yep.
do you have a favorite spot, either a coffee shop or a place at the house where you like to do your writing?
I'm a desktop user. So desktop really hammers you down to one location. Like I love having a full setup. I love having two monitors and a big keyboard and stuff. So I've got like it doesn't really matter where that setup is as long as I can have my desk. Right now, my desk is on a old door resting on two sawhorses because we're in the middle of a remodel and all of our big furniture and everything is packed away, but I still need my work spot. So I've got two sawhorses with a door, and that is where I'm working. So I'm as long as I have my two monitors and my keyboard and some headphones, I'm usually good to go. I have written in all kinds of weird circumstances. I tried coffee shop writing up a little bit. I once when I think I was writing Nissa Glass's fourth book, and it was I can't remember if it was my mother, if it was either my birthday or Mother's Day, right? One of those me holidays. And I told Matt, well, I think for this holiday, I'd like to go out while you touch the kids for like several hours and just write in a coffee shop. So we'll go do that. And I did that. And I'm like, this has been romanticized to me, but this is actually not very productive because I people watch and I kept people watching. And like, I was like, oh, I think I'm better in my own little world just because I get distracted by people too easy. So yeah, I am very much into my desktop and stuff. I can write pretty much anywhere. I've written on my phone, I've written on notepads, I've written on of course sometimes I'll drag my laptop someplace because I know I won't be able to write if I don't. But yeah, I'm just a habitual writer at this point. I've tried to write 1,000 words a day, unless I'm sick or there's something else going on. Like I used to take D&D night off.
Okay, my next question is, while you're writing, do you have a favorite snack or favorite drink to be munching on?
Those are rewards for when you finish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't really. So my goal is 1,000 words a day, and that takes me about an hour. So it's not like a long drawn out period. I will usually have water on hand just in case, but um, maybe tea if I really think it's going to be a long session. But mostly I just that, and then when it's done, I'll pour myself a glass of wine.
Any other special ways that you celebrate the completion of a book?
I am weird. The way I celebrate is I want people to read it as fast as possible. So I immediately go into my Discord, my Facebook group, and a couple of writers groups, and just like, who wants to better read this right now? I need that. I like there's like I said, I write to get it out to people. So until people have actually read it, the book is just not finished to me. And that's what I do. I need to go find those readers right away. And that like um I've been forcing myself to at least run the spell check program through it first. But even that delay of like to do that is hard for me. I want somebody to start reading it immediately and let me know what they think. So for me, getting it out there to usually it ends up being like I've got like I would say four core beta readers who pretty much read everything I do, but then I like to get new readers on everything. So I'm very good at selling myself. That sounds bad. I'm very good at selling my plot premises in my book. So I use it kind of to practice pitching them too. So I'll go into my groups and like, well, this is what the book's about, and this is how long is this is why you should want it. This is like the whole exciting premise, and I can always snag people at that because I'm a decent blurb writer. So I always have, oh, I want to read that. I want to read that, which is always a good sign. If people want to read it, then you know you've got a good hook. So I've usually been able to get like 5 to 10 beta readers per book just doing that, and that for me is the best part is getting it out there so people are actually reading it and then waiting to see what they say about it, and you know that's the celebration.
And outside of writing, do you have any other forms of creativity where you're able to maybe do some painting or any hobbies that you do outside of writing?
So I crochet a little bit, but sporadically. I usually only crochet if I'm watching something for a long period, like if we're watching a TV show. Um, I am very. A couple years ago, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, and after that, after about a year, I'm like, well, now I want to be the dungeon master, game master, dungeon master. So I started doing that, and that is the biggest creative hobby that takes place. It's a little bit writing, and it's a little bit game design, and it's a little bit improv. It's like improv because you have to deal with your players. What you never know what they're going to say or do, and then you have to respond to it. It's also puzzle design. Like I love DMing, and I go into Incarnate, which is this program that lets you make maps, and I'll make dungeon maps and scene maps, and yeah, I'm doing one right now. So I was watching this YouTuber named Wendigoon who was doing this series on the fearsome creatures of the Lumberwoods, which is this early American folklore about lumberjacks who go out in the woods and they tell stories about, it's where the snipe hunt comes from, or uh, the hoop snake. It's a snake that bites its own tail and goes rolling across
Yeah.
all these like crazy little folklore stories. I'm like, I'm going to make a D&D campaign that is that. So right now I'm doing this whole massive Northwoods campaign where you're a lumberjack at this lumber camp, and all these strange creatures come in and cause havoc. So that is something I'm very passionate about. Like I always kind of wanted to get into game design, but I always knew I wasn't I didn't have the technical aptitude for video games. Like I don't have a math and science background. But I've been a gamer for a long time. So when I found out about TTRPGs, which you don't need the math and science background, you need the writing background, you need the creativity background, and you need to be able to world build, which are all skills I have. When I found out about that, I'm like, okay, that's where I'm gonna focus that drive for. So I spent a lot of time on my TTRPGs, which
I,
stands for tabletop role playing game. Sorry.
I feel like I can have a separate episode with you for an hour long talking about Dungeons and Dragons and games.
Probably could. I'm very passionate. I'm a fairly new player as it seems go. There's some people who've been playing since the 80s out there. And I've basically, oh gosh, have I been playing 3 years, 4 years? I don't know. It's not that long. Um, but I've really got into the scene, and I've really gotten into game design development, and yeah, it is a lot of fun. It's kind of the somebody was there's this meme that goes around. It's like somebody says, I would like to write a Dungeons and Dragons campaign, but just for me, and I would make all the decisions. And he says, somebody just informed me that this is called writing a book. So yeah, they're very cross skills. I mean, and like I said, I've always been a gamer. Like I don't count. It's hard to say gaming is creativity, but I love doing some cozy gaming like Stardew Valley, and I've been playing Lord of the Rings online obsessively for a long time. Um, so I it's kind of a combination of a lot of my interests. So
So, fun fact, I've always known about Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I was born in the 80s. I've known about it all my life, but the first time I saw Dungeons and Dragons being acted out was actually a few years ago on Stranger Things. That was my first time. I said, "Oh, that's Dungeons and Dragons." I never knew. I just thought that they were. I mean, I would always hear that it's something evil and don't stay away from it. But it looks pretty cool. So maybe I'll be getting into that too one day.
it's collaborative storytelling, and like any collaborative storytelling, it's what you and your players bring to the table. I've been lucky to play players who are not real edge lords, as they say. They're not trying to push the button and or push the boundaries and do too much crazy stuff, but or not crazy stuff, but like inappropriate stuff so far. I know there's horror stories because it's like playing video games with people online, and there's always going to be the one person who's just trying to shock people. But so far, I've been lucky with the groups I've had.
So, what's been your favorite experience so far as a dungeon master?
Okay, so I had this setup where the characters were traveling through like a desert environment, and they keep hearing about this awesome city of pleasure. It's like this city that everybody wants to go to. It'll make your wildest dreams come true. And they were also looking for an artifact that was lost, and they had got a hint that the artifact might be in the City of Pleasure. So they go in, and the city literally makes all their wildest dreams come true. Like anything that they express desire to have is somehow automatically in that city, like within the next 5 minutes. So they start getting suspicious as they do. And one of the players was so convinced the city was evil because it would make sense, right? It's evil. But I twist around them because the city, what was happening was the city was made by a wizard who just really, really wanted friends. So if he brought people in and just gave them whatever they want, they would stay and talk with him. So he was just really lonely. Players was so convinced it was evil. He was doing all these tests to see if the city would, well, maybe the city's holding us captive. We should try to leave and see if it lets us go. And I'm like, okay, you do that. And he's like, okay. So I'm like, you travel across the desert. And he's like, okay, so we got away. I'm like, yeah, you got away. So wait a minute. What if I'm not really, what if the city's lying to me? What if I'm still inside the city? I want to pinch myself. So we had to go back to the city, and they were just so convinced. He was just so convinced there was something evil going on that he was like pushing all the buttons and poking everything, and he was just going crazy. And at the end, all he needed to do was go up to the wizard and ask him nicely for the artifacts.
so,
It
so
took them. They drew that out for so long just because they were looking for something that wasn't there.
I can see in your face and I can hear in your voice that you really are having a great time and a lot of fun playing these games, being involved in Dungeons and Dragons. And while you're uh, doing these other outside activities outside of writing, does it have an impact on your writing? And if so, how does it influence your writing?
So actually, one of my books, Power Play, it's the second book in the teen spinoff. Jake and his friends, there's a new kid at camp, right? Who they don't know what power she has. People around her tend to disappear. That's the thing. And she doesn't talk very much because she's kind of traumatized. And it turns out her power is when she starts to imagine things, she zones out, goes into her own pocket universe where she creates those things in her head. So she plays out scenarios, but she can suck people into them. So they make
Okay.
a mistake of trying to play a TTRPG with her, not knowing what's going to happen. And she pulls them all into the game. So I do have an entire book that is my characters basically playing Dungeons and Dragons in real life and trying to figure out how to get out of it. Um, but I think they're the thing is about books versus TTRPGs is they're very different uh, interactions. I think Dungeons and Dragons actually suffers when it has a tight plot line, when your characters know what they have to do next to keep the story moving. Because you want that in a book. You want the book to keep moving on tightly and be very closely placed. But that doesn't really allow players to have the freedom to do whatever they want in a world, which is what characters want. Like if they know that they have to go here and do that, what I like to do with my TTRPGs is just give a branching uh, world and with many choices and see which they pick and let them kind of follow what's fun to them. Sometimes you can put a very big flashing go here. This is a cool thing. You'll want to do this sign in front of them just so they don't miss out. Though I guess one thing you can take away from TTRPGs is that, and I have found this in my books too with beta readers, is sometimes the players or the reader will latch on to this tiny detail you were so convinced was not at all important, and they are so convinced this is the key to everything. And then I had this once. It's like we get to the end of the book, and the betters look like you never told me who was the gardener. I'm like, what? The garden. There's a garden outside the palace. Who was taking care of the garden? I'm like, I don't know. It's a garden. But to players are the same way. It's like you go into the room and there is a chair and a portrait on the wall. What's of the portrait of? It's of three bears. Oh my gosh, this is a clue. I'm like, no, it's not. I just made that up. So I think you have to. What I would take away from that is if you're going to put in details, let them matter. Otherwise, people will get kind of hooked up on them, and it can like end up uh, being unsatisfying because they feel like something's missing. So it's that priority of what you tell and what you don't tell, and what moves the story along versus what is going to get them like questioning it. And though sometimes that works out. Sometimes like, well, I guess now the bears are a puzzle, so do that. So you can do that with writing too. It's like, well, if you really care about the gardener, here's a gardener.
So now for this part of the interview, I'm gonna start slowly wrapping up. So my next question is, are there any upcoming authors that you suggest we keep an eye on at the moment?
So one of my absolute favorite indie authors is Naomi P. Cohen, and she writes very slowly, and it drives me crazy because I was like, she's a perfectionist. She rewrites her books like 3 times. I'm sometimes I better read for her, and I'm like, okay, this is great. She's like, I'm going to rewrite it again, but she's got some one of the few authors. I'm usually a very fast reader, so I don't take the time to think about the prose much. But Naomi's prose is some of the best I've read. She's always very smooth. Her words kind of skate, and she does fantasy that it it it's very it's got like this whimsical feel to it, but still just a little bit of grounding to it. And I really like her stuff. She's her last book, I believe, was The Winter Queen's Tale. But she's also got Fae of the Castle Garden, which is I almost want to call it an urban fantasy, but it's also more historical fantasy. It's set in like 1860s or 70s New York with immigrant Fae living in City Park, and that's really good. And the Circus Phantasm is more contemporary fantasy about a traveling circus run by magical creatures. They're all really good. But she's only got like 3 books out because another one who I really always enjoy, EJ Kitchens has really great world building. She never lets her characters kiss. It drives me crazy. Like they do kiss, it's really chaste. I'm like, this more kissing, please. But that's my only complaint with her. So those are two of my favorites. Catherine Bonham just wrote I think she's kind of switched over to writing more middle grade and younger stuff, but she writes stuff that's inspired by video games and online culture a lot. And I really appreciate that because it's kind of an underserved. I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old especially, her culture right now is based on like Five Nights at Freddy's and Benny's and the Ink Machine and Sonic the Hedgehog. Those are her idols, and seeing
Mhm.
that sort of stuff brought into written fiction is really good. I mean, they do have spin-off novels like Five Nights at Freddy's is their whole thing, but they're written by the game developer and they're a little more commercial. But yeah, I love seeing that come to life. So those are 3 I would call out.
Well, and now my last question for this interview is, for you, why is creativity worth expressing? Why is it worth getting it out?
I mean, we're as a species, we kind of thrive on storytelling. It expresses ideas and it helps us work through things. There's a lot of like emotions and stuff that you can't, like, especially when you're growing up, you learn to process emotion through stories before you do in real life with the experiences you have, usually, hopefully. And I think that's really helpful. It like builds those empathy and mental bonds in your head. But also, it's just, I think what we're meant to do. Like, I don't think I could stop making up stories if I wanted to. It just how things connect. And um, I like to explore ideas and stuff. And I think that's very important. Um, Also, if people do need that escapism of just fun sometimes, like I don't consider my works anything life changing or super deep, but people love them and they get lost in them and they will follow the stories, and some of them will. I've had people write fan fiction for me right about this point. I it was even starting to become to the point. It was like, well, I wonder if other people want to play around this world, so I put out a anthology in my superhero world that I let other authors submit to, and like I got like 10 stories that were really great with other people writing superheroes. And I do love that element that it lets us have this kind of shared. I don't know if you've ever been in a fandom where there's like a shared knowledge base of things that you're excited about, and they're not they can get toxic, but on the right hand, it's just people talking about and sharing ideas about something that lets you connect, and I think that's very important in creating that. um community around ideas is to me really great. And that's the problem with being an indie author is your reach is so small that it can be hard to find those communities. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to build up a little bit of one, but I've also been doing this for 10 years. It didn't happen overnight. Uh, so yeah, that I think that's always when anyone's getting into indie authorship, my first thing is, well, you need to find your community. You need to start, if somebody reads your book and really likes it, get connected with them in any way possible. Like invite them to your Discord server, make sure that your friends on Facebook, they're following them on Facebook, and you just want to keep people like that around you so that the feedback and the collaboration in that community can kind of build and support itself, because it is about connection, really. That's why we tell stories. We tell stories to connect with other people, to express ideas, to share with them. And I think that's why creative is important, is because it builds bridges between people and the way they think and the way they see the world and the way other things cannot. You know, it's communication.
Well, thank you so much, H L Burke. And where can people in the audience find more information about you and your work?
So my website is hlburkeauthor.com. It's pretty simple. I did recently have to fight because my provider did a 200% increase on me, but I moved my servers over and everything seems to be working fine. That's one thing about being an indie author, they don't tell you. You end up being your own tech support. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, so I'm as H L Burke on most social media, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm not going to call it X. Nobody calls it X. So that's yeah, so I'm around the internet, and that's how you can find me. My books are available. The Superhero Rehabilitation Project is Amazon exclusive and in Kindle Unlimited, and the rest of my books are wide, and you can find them wherever ebooks are sold.
Okay, well, thank you so much, H L Burke, for being a guest here on Creativity Worth Expressing. And to the audience, make sure to go check out H L Burke's website and to check out her books. Again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this post so more people can discover the beauty of creativity worth expressing.